follow the leader. 1, 2, 3. We may be trapped.
Hello, lovelies. Not a lot of housekeeping. This week, I've managed to make a bit of a dent in my review stack, so let's hope that can continue and I can finish going through a lot of the stuff that people have been kind enough to send me to review. Fools. Yeah, so let's get into the comments. On the old Mouse Guard review, Saint Solo says, so, with all the rules, do you think it would have been better if it was written as a solo role-playing game? And, dear God, no. At least when you're playing as a group, you have several minds working on the rules and trying to figure out how they all interact and work. While solo, I guess, assuming that you want to play the game properly and not just cheat in one way or another, then you only have your own brain. So I think it would be far too much of a strain for you to deal with in that way. So in short, no. On excuse me, the old Cyborg review. Stupid cough. Zerovi says, I almost bought this book, still might, which is why I watched the review. And yeah, that rule 0 didn't sit right with me. I also wanted to then run a corpo campaign and break the rule 0. In a TTRPG, you should never tell the GM what they cannot do, plain and simple. Once the game is at my table, I dictate what can and cannot be done. That's how it works. Still on the fence about buying it. If I did, I'd just make Rule 0 not exist. A rules-light cyberpunk-style game is something I'm looking for. I do have original Cyberpunk 2020, but I wouldn't call it rules-light. Yeah, a lot of designers seem to, say a lot. A particular school of designers seems to have an issue with letting go of the game once it's finished and once it's out. I've always felt like you can't dictate to anybody what they do with your game. Once it's out and in the wild, people will do what they want with it. The street finds its own use for things, you might say. And so they started putting in this language in their books, like they don't trust their own talent to get the message across and feel that they have to put all this other stuff in there. If you're writing say anti-capitalist game, the anti-capitalist message should ideally come through in the subtext of the game itself, even through the mechanics, how it plays, what the focus and the artwork and so on says. You shouldn't explicitly come out and say this game is not for capitalists or whatever, particularly when you're selling it for 40 quid or whatever, which is something that Simone Cittadini said. So, yeah. I also think Cyborg is much more wedded to its setting than Morkborg is. Morkborg might be odd and it might be presented in a particular way, but at its heart it's just a very, very simple, stripped down fantasy role-playing experience, while Cyborg is much more intimately wedded to many of the assumptions about its setting. I still think it's fun to play around with. I still think it's good and it's an interesting object and art book to own, but it is more hobbled by its setting than Morkborg is. So maybe don't. I don't know. I would say it's worth it as an art book and so on. Most of the comments this past week were on my video about the revelation, in inverted commas, that the red box fighter is apparently a rather beefy woman from the 1980s East German shot put team. Some people seem to miss the point. Some people didn't seem to watch the video at all before commenting. You know, that's kind of par for the course on YouTube, especially as your comment numbers and your subscriber counts rise in tandem. But still, there's a few things I want to respond to from the comments there. So let's get into it. Chris Hollow says, gatekeep your hobbies against women. No, this is not the point. If you think I agree with that point, being married to a gamer girl, and having been deeply involved in Storyteller, White Wolf, and the LARP scene that grew up around it, the problem isn't women, and it's not men, and it's not any of these other irrelevant categories you want to throw at it. It is people who see something great, come in, and then vandalize and shit up everything. That's the issue, I think. If the thing is so great and wonderful that you appreciate it and you want to be a part of it, maybe don't shitify it, because that will tend to undo the very things that attracted you to it in the first place. Now, this isn't to say that everything is somehow trapped in amber and can never change, or that changes can't be improvements, but those kinds of changes tend to happen through a sort of gradual change rather than a seismic shift, and they bring everybody along and don't alienate the people who are already there. So that's the problem. This attitude of, this is wonderful, let's change absolutely everything about it. And that attitude is not streamed by gender or anything else, really. It just seems to be this urge that some people have to fuck with shit when the shit should not be fucked with. Curden says, if he is an icon, what is his name? I think you're kind of missing the point. Right, there can be iconic images without you ever knowing who or what is in them. There's a poster that was ubiquitous over here in the UK for many years. Many a student dorm and so on became very famous. No one really knew or cared who the person was in the poster. It was a girl in a tennis outfit, kind of almost scratching her ass, with the skirt lifted up to display her bottom. It's an iconic image. Does anyone know or care who that woman was? Maybe you do, enough to go digging, but nobody who bought the poster cared. But it's still an iconic image, and so it is with the male fighter on the cover of Redbox D&D. It's an iconic image. You don't need to know anything else about them. And if the idea was that this fighter was somehow androgynous or mysterious, or you could project whatever you wanted onto it, then making a miniature out of it, or a figure which already pre-existed, is kind of silly. So Matthew Blaine says, you're mad about the wrong thing. Lol, you sound like you have sand in your pussy. If you don't like it, there are other games to play. It's kind of weird for this kind of person to turn up and say something misogynistic. But like I said in the video, which maybe you should have bothered to watch first before commenting, it's not about the female figure of the fighter on the red box. It's that and and all this other shit that has gone on. And if you want to take an even wider view on everything, it's everything that's happened across a whole bunch of people's hobbies, right? And this is just the latest thing. I'm sure many other people have the same experience. If you have siblings where they would needle you and annoy you and needle you and annoy you and needle you and annoy you until you snapped and maybe punched them, and that was what your parents saw, and you got punished even though they'd been annoying you on purpose for just this reaction for hours, days, whatever, and all you see is the moment, or all they saw is the moment when you snapped, right? But it's not about whatever they did last minute. It's everything that came before and what they just did. And I'm not especially mad, save that I am mad because I hold creators' rights in quite high esteem. And the creator has said what it is, what it was, and we should respect that. And the kind of people that are defending the change are supposed to be the kinds of people that care about labour rights, intellectual property rights, and so on of creators. They're supposed to be people who stand up for that sort of thing, and instead they're not. And this has been well established over the years that you people have been listening to me on here. Hypocrisy is something that really, really gets my goat. As Zrodin says, great intro, which was my Mr. Ben intro. And yes, representation matters. Sure, let's be honest. If we didn't have representation, you would be out. Maybe you are out. As a black dude over 50, I do count as a grognard, but I also had to fight through culture just to play. Some years harder than others. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the satanic panic just happens in reverse. Sometimes they come for this group or that group, and sometimes they come for you. Representation at least says there is room for everyone. See, I don't know that it does. There's a bunch of stuff in this comment. So we have studies saying that for most people in gaming, fairly uniquely, though this is studying computer games more, that representation doesn't actually matter very much. Perhaps because you are controlling the character rather than passively viewing the character, but people either don't identify at all with what is essentially a playing piece. It would be like identifying with the pawn in chess or whatever, or they identify with the struggles and so on that the character goes through, right, regardless of who or what that character might be. So there's that. Let's put that to the one side for a moment. There is nothing in these games, most games, that particularly represents me as a partially disabled games designer, right? And probably nor should they be, because an adventure in which I was represented in any of these games would not be a particularly interesting or effective one. So I don't need it. What I might identify with tend to be these sort of emotional and other struggles that a character might have. Or I want to play characters that are nothing like me because I want to experience the other, being someone else in some way, right? Someone, for example, who is fully able-bodied or desired by women or whatever else, you know? Things that don't particularly get played out in my real life, for example, because I'm married in the latter case. That was a joke, by the way. Not that I'm married, but never mind. So lastly, yeah, okay, so you're an older black guy. I don't know what country you're from, probably the United States, since that's where most of my English-speaking viewers come from. I mean, I think America has unique racial issues due to its past, but I have played with a lot of people from an assortment of racial minorities, and the reasons why they found it difficult to get into gaming mostly stem from their home culture or subculture, their ethnic culture, and not from gaming, which they've always found hugely welcoming and appealing, and so on. So the problem has been the ethnicity and culture that they're coming from, and unfortunately that tends to follow along somewhat stereotypical lines. So South Asians and Asians who have gotten into role-playing games have had a hard time because their parents disapproved, it was distracting from their studies, and so on, right? It's a stupid, horrible stereotype, but it's somewhat true. So there was a lot of pressure on them not to waste all their time on these games, you know, going out, doing stuff when they could have been studying in one way or another. With the black gamers that I have known, it has tended to be judgment from their own internal ethnic culture, homophobia regarding gaming and other artistic pursuits as being somehow gay, and coming from a more religious community which is somewhat famous for its anti-LGBT viewpoints. Doing anything that was perceived as effeminate was a big deal for them. Keep in mind that the Black English culture is different to the African American culture, mostly coming from, you know, Jamaica, West Indies, those sorts of places. There was also an attitude that I have seen in African American culture as well, because I've been involved internationally in gaming for many years now, that anything like gaming is white people shit. You shouldn't be doing it. That it, you know, you should be into certain things. You should be into certain sports, certain kinds of music, all of that kind of thing. And that was where the pressure came from. Again, not any sense that gaming was exclusionary or whatever else. So I really don't think representation matters that much. And when you couple this drive for representation with this drive against what they call cultural appropriation, you have two values that are in massive conflict with one another. And as a lefty, I have thoughts about diversity hiring and positive discrimination, but I've waffled long enough on that comment. Okay, Sam Dawley says, corporations are going to pursue every buck they can and kiss every ass they can to cater to whatever they perceive as the current zeitgeist. Personally, I don't care if they update the artwork or rework game elements or what have you. If it really offends you, vote with your wallets. They'll get the message, but honestly, the game I play and my memories and experiences are not beholden to them. They might own the IP, but they can't tell me how to play or dictate how or what I appreciate. Now, I like the attitude. I think it's true to an extent. However, see, here's the problem. Corporations aren't pursuing every buck they can, or at least they're not pursuing every buck they can from the end user, the end consumer, and that is distorting the market in a bad way. There are ways to distort markets that can be good, but this isn't it. So yeah, we're in this weird position where hardcore lefties like me are wishing the corporations would go back to pursuing every buck that they can, because that would be a preferable outcome compared to what we have at the moment. And, you know, they're losing money. Wizards has been consistently overall losing value. Games Workshop's shares have taken a hit. Profits are down. Some of that is the whole post-COVID thing and so on. But some of it is definitely down to their policies and their seeming hatred of their own audiences. So people are voting with their wallets, but they're not getting the message. And lastly, I'd say that, unfortunately, the shit people get up to can taint or ruin those childhood memories and so on. Watch a marathon of all the new Star Wars, then go back and watch the original trilogy, and it does leave a sour taste in your mouth. And knowing, the fate of some of these characters does take away from that original hero's journey a lot. Wiley, something in Polish that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, says, yeah, I think like usual you missed the point. Gee, thanks. Frankly, just like your reviews. Sorry your content's so droll. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. And then the uploading of things on drive-thru, begging for donations, because my poor munchkin. Lol, lame, unsub. Also, trans rights aren't human rights, you dolt. Trans people are human. Trans people have rights. Trans rights are human rights. Because if they're human, then they already have human rights and don't need trans rights. Trans people are a subset of humans. Good Lord, read the context and remember to stay hydrated, my guy. Well, off you fuck. Space Ranger says, this is a great snapshot of what's wrong with the West these days. They took a male with a body type that boys could aspire to for their own betterment, said fuck you men and boys, and replaced it with a woman with a body type that no girl would aspire to. And that's me being kind. There's an entirely valid argument going around that depictions of women in media being made to look more mannish as a way of catering to the trans movement and not out of any representation concerns for women and girls. Either way, it's TTRPG bad faith business as usual. You sound paranoid and unhinged, my dude. It's not like what's wrong with the West. I would consider that our tolerance and openness as a society is a massive strength of the West, and certainly historically that's the case. I think where you are on point is when you say that they took this character that many people sort of looked at, saw themselves in, decided to buy the box, right? They took that and fucked with it. So I think that's right. I don't think it's a valid argument to say that depictions of women in media are being made to look more mannish as a way of catering to the trans movement. The trans movement is not a market large enough to be worth pursuing. Virtue signalling people is, perhaps, and so maybe there's the ghost of a point there, but this is hardly the downfall of the West, and it really doesn't make much sense for that to be a reason. It's much more likely to be this drive for more realistic depictions of women and men to a degree in all media, which I think is also missing the point in that this kind of escapist media is kind of aspirational, or is meant to be representing heroes, and heroes who are one set of khaki shorts and a vest top away from Walmart. It's not aspirational. It doesn't look heroic. It's not how we imagine, gods and heroes and things. So I think that's where the disconnect lies. Cupidka says, representation absolutely matters. That's why the political left is trying so hard to seize cultural territory and burn it to the ground. They want to ensure there is no culture, just atomized bug people that make good labourers. Representing our homeland culture is absolutely critical. Excluding foreigners and left-wing zealots who hate us is also absolutely critical. You sound unhinged, my dude, and the only reason I've brought out your comment is to say that I am not with you. Just because I occasionally complain about some of the same things does not mean I am on your side. Alright? Go stick your head in a pig. Dan Morgan says, yeah, it's like Wizards of the Coast are spiteful pricks. They're mad about finally having to do something about the racism that had been in the setting for so long. Now they're retaliating and taking things away just to be spiteful. To which I asked, what racism? Which is obviously a necessary question. Dan then went on to say something that I had previously only encountered on the madhouse that is X. It says, oh, things like orcs being used as an inherently evil stand-in for the ugliest stereotypes of African Americans. One of the most egregious examples was way back in the day. Dragon magazine had an article that referenced the bad part of a city. They showed a ghetto scene with orcs clearly used as stand-ins for black people. The orc in the foreground had his coat open, offering drugs to the viewer. I'll have to do some digging to try and find it. He found it, I found it on PDF, I went to the page reference, and this was from years and years ago. Clearly it made some kind of impact on him. It's a goblinoid of some kind offering illicit wares, okay? And you're making an awful lot of assumptions there. Why is it when you look at something like an orc, you decide it's a black person? No one else is doing that, so I don't know why you would. It's a very, very peculiar thing to look at that and correlate the two. That's racist, if anything. Full Metal Dragons says, and yet the D&D 5e addicted will still flock to the new 2024 D&D books like crack addicts because they must have the latest official D&D game. I really do think that we're in another tail end of 2nd edition, tail end of 3rd edition sort of situation. Now 3rd edition was massively popular, 5th edition was massively popular, but still, at the end of 2nd edition, the gaming world massively diversified, and other games rose up in consciousness. Same thing during the whole 4th edition run, and I think a lot of people will jump ship this time around. Now, will D&D still be the biggest fish in our little pond? Yeah, probably. At least once it gets going again. But I think a lot of people just feel that they don't need a new edition. A lot of those 5e addicted folk. And they say it'll be backwards compatible. To what extent that turns out to be true remains to be seen. It feels like a money grab, right? Because you need more money. What you do is you put out a new edition. And the cycle is normally every 5 years. So we are overdue to a fairly big extent, I would say. How the whole walled garden online play thing is going to work out remains to be seen, but it'll be interesting times, and I think we're seeing some faint echoes of that diversification, but they're all fantasy heartbreakers. Shadow Dark, MCDM, etc. Right? Dagger Heart. Are any of these gonna take the lead? Probably not, but it is interesting to see that echo of the Pathfinder environment happening all over again. Chris says, people say so what because they want to seem above the fray or don't care, but every time you compromise with commies you become more commie. Well, I was already quote commie unquote, so they can't get me. I'm fine. And like some other people, maybe should have watched the whole video before making a comment. I don't know. On the Fallout After Action report, Paul Berry says, I'm liking the Amazon Fallout series so far. What game would you like to see adapted next? Doesn't say whether he means computer game or role-playing game. I gave a kind of quick flip answer, which was that I would love to see Front Mission adapted into a TV series or an anime, but for all I know, it already has been, and it never made it to the West. So I don't know. I didn't bother looking that up beforehand. Tabletop games. Iron Kingdoms. Warhammer 40,000, obviously. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, less obviously. Those are the ones that immediately leap to thought. I mean, Cyberpunk already has been to an extent. Computer games. Well, I said Front Mission. That's harder, actually, weirdly, for me to think of other computer games that I would want to see made into TV series. Maybe Far Cry. Don't know which one, but that might be fun. Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff these days is what we used to call transmedia, which didn't mean what trans implies now, but rather that a project would be released across multiple different types of media and would all interrelate. Not quite cinematic universe territory, but kind of. I mean, take Soundland, for instance. It's a game, it's an anime, it's a manga, all at once. So, you know, a lot of things do this already. So, yeah. The thing is, usually, kind of like video game films, you know, game films, game TV series tend not to be great most of the time. I thought the D&D movie was okay, much better than the original efforts. But then, you know, the Halo TV series has been panned. Fallout's good. Other things bad. You know, it hasn't settled down yet. But maybe game adaptations are the next big thing, if people can start showing that you can do it well. On the issue of man v bear for the hearts of women, Andrew Beaton says, "It strikes me that you should avoid social commentary when you're not affected by it. Some of the replies on here also show that it's easier to mock something than it is to attempt to understand it. I have my reasons for understanding the stance of the women, which isn't grounded in simping or white knighting, but in a past career." Okay, a lot of assumptions there. Men are affected by this attitude of fear towards men. It is a constant drip of invalidation, of feeling hated and alienated and feared for no good reason. You know, I broke down the stats. I got in trouble on Leanna Kersner's channel for leaving a comment that said it's not rational. Yeah, okay, most fears aren't rational, but intellectualization, reasoning, these can be ways to control your fears and understand that they are not rational. That's one of the things I took from therapy, was that a way to control your irrational aspects is to take a step back and intellectualize the problem, break it down. You know, is this rational? And women's fear of men as a whole is not rational, especially fear of strangers, which is the least likely situation in which they are likely to be attacked, right? While for men, it's a whole half again on as likely that you're going to run into trouble from a stranger. And yet men live their lives fine, as though they're not going to be attacked any second of any day by anyone they run into, right? And most people will have, well, I was going to say thousands and tens of thousands, but that's only going to apply to urban people who go outside. You know, you're going to have lots of interactions over your lifetime with men, the vast and overwhelming majority of which, like 99.99999%, do not attack you. Right? If you encountered that many bears every day, every week, every month, every year throughout your lifetime, how do you feel like the odds would go there. If you ran into as many grizzly bears as you do men, what do you think your survival chances would be in that situation? Right? And if... Right, so we can understand why women are afraid, because they're grown up being made afraid, controlled by fear in a lot of ways, and have maybe had, negative encounters. So have men. So why does it rule women's interactions with the world in a way that it doesn't men's? This is particularly what interests me, is that as a man I'm a much higher risk all the time of being killed or maimed or hurt or even raped, if you take into account prison stats. And yet as a man I don't necessarily live my life in fear day to day in the same way that women do. And a step towards understanding and overcoming that is understanding that it is not rational. That your fears are not rational. And this is why I've drawn all these comparisons with race, etc. Right? As we're about to cover, because I'm going to talk about the Kalergi plan comments again, because they never stop. Racists make this same argument, right? Well, black people commit the majority of crime. Okay, but that exists within a context, doesn't it? And even so, we should not, hopefully do not, blame all black and minority ethnic people because of the actions of a handful, regardless what the stats say, because the difference doesn't really amount to much overall. So would you rather encounter a black man or a white man, a black or white stranger in the woods, right? Because, the statistics are saying one thing, perhaps, with a certain interpretation, but that's obviously racist. And choosing the bear over the man is obviously sexist. And yet people can't seem to process that or understand, right? And even if the majority of victims of black crime are black men, right? Because I see women, particularly arch-feminists, saying, okay, so men are victimized more, but who by? Right? That doesn't make any difference either. That doesn't... If that doesn't mean black people are more dangerous, right, because they're attacked by other black people in the majority, it doesn't make sense to argue that because men are hurt more by other men, that somehow alters the metric here. It is so obviously bigoted when you convert it into a racial question. I don't understand why people can't grok it otherwise, except that there must be bigots, or are being ruled by irrationality. Alright, so let's end with the Kalergi plan, which I know you all look forward to every week. Nicholas Halfer says, tell me, how long did the culturally mixed Macedonian, Mongolian, Japanese, British and French empires exist? Okay, well, I'm not a specialist on most of those, but the Japanese are famously not mixed ethnic. I don't think the Mongolian Empire was particularly mixed ethnic. I don't know about the Macedonians, but the British and French empires were multi-ethnic. So, Nicholas, I'm glad you asked. So I can't speak to some of these, but the British Empire is arguably still going today, because Britain itself is made up of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, which are technically part of the English Empire rather than the British Empire, perhaps. We also still have many little far-flung islands and territories. So arguably the British Empire is still going, thanks to its overall emphasis on multiculturalism, local rule, being a trade-based empire rather than a military-based empire, and still maintains relatively good relations with a lot of formal imperial holdings via the Commonwealth as well, which is another strength of our relatively, I must emphasize, relatively enlightened approach to our empire. So that would mean that the British Empire has lasted from 1583 to at least 1997, and is arguably still going today, which is well over 400 years as a multicultural empire. The Roman Empire was famously multicultural, and while it went through various forms, arguably started in 625 BCE and ran through to 476 CE. Now, I appreciate the mathematics is a little bit difficult for a drooling racist moron, but that amounts to over 1,000 years. The Islamic Golden Age, which was a sort of imperial era, which is more about ideology and religion than, multiculturalism or ethnicity, but still, they were pretty multicultural for the time. I know it seems weird when we look at modern Islam to think of Islam as an example of tolerance and so on, but that lasted about 500 years. I mean, if we contrast that to the racist and intolerant would-be empires like, say, the Nazis, they lasted 12 whole years, and the Confederacy, similarly racist, about 5 years, though it had imperial ambitions at the start. So basically what this amounts to is you have no idea what you're talking about, and you should wind your neck in, you racist cunt. Yormi Castro says, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that these socialist elites at the United Nations are trying to impose mass immigration of immigrants on countries to implement all these gender policies, and those who refuse are attacked. It doesn't take a genius to see that the media is full of left-wing propaganda and the censorship that exists on social networks. Currently, the social network with the most freedom of expression is Twitter, thanks to Elon Musk, and who knows if Elon Musk really wants there to be freedom of expression, or if he has more interests up his sleeve, since he is also one of the elite. But apparently he has seen who is against all that nonsense, and the socialists want to implement, which is a mangled sentence. I don't really know what you meant there. But you know what, Yormi? You're right. It doesn't take a genius to see all of these things at work. It takes a fucking idiot. Zang. Rob Necronomicon's art has graced several Postmortem Studios products, and Rob has also produced some stock art pieces you can use in your own projects or at your gaming table. Rob's stark, dark graphical style is perfect for horror, old-school fantasy, and dark future projects. You can buy Rob's art from Postmortem Studios at DriveThruRPG or at post-mort.com.
The normal question, the first question is always, are these cannibals? No, they are not cannibals. Cannibalism in the true sense of the word implies an interspecies activity. These creatures cannot be considered human. They prey on humans. They do not prey on each other. That's the difference. They attack and they feed only on warm human flesh. Intelligence? Seemingly little or no reasoning power, but basic skills remain are more remembered behaviors from normal life. There are reports of these creatures using tools, but even these actions are the most primitive. The use of external articles as bludgeons and so forth. I might point out to you that even animals will adopt the basic use of tools in this manner. These creatures are nothing but pure, motorized instinct. We must not be lulled by the concept that these are our family members or our friends. They are not. They will not respond to such emotions. They must be destroyed on sight.